The grey mullet is one of the most sporting fish to be found around our shores. But it's a fish that's surrounded by myth and ignorance, so much so that most anglers regard them as uncatchable, and few people fish for the species. In this film, we'd like to dispel those myths and suggest some methods that have worked for us. Well, I've come to the south coast, to Dorset, where there are a number of locations where we can try for mullet. The harbours of Poole and Weymouth, the breakwaters and jetties of Portland Harbour, the rocky shore and coves around Lulworth, and the many rivers and estuaries that flow towards the English Channel. All of these places are the summer haunts of the grey mullet. Dorset is also the home of Mike Ladle.
No, nothing at all, yeah. What are you after? Grey mullet I'm after. Mullet? Something out, didn't I? Yeah, I suppose some people
Mike
think they have,
works
anyway.
as a zoologist at the Institute of Freshwater Ecology Laboratories near Wareham. Many will be familiar with Mike's books and his regular articles in the angling press. He's spent much of his life studying and catching fish, having been hooked on angling since he was a lad. He's used his knowledge of fish behaviour to develop some original and effective methods for catching mullet. Hello there, Mike.
Oh, Steve.
What have you got there then?
Well, it's a scale of a thin-lipped mullet from the local river here. And I was just looking at it to see whether I could read its age from the scale.
How do you do that?
Well, it's quite easy. You can, when these scales grow on the fish, they grow obviously from when the fish is tiny till it gets bigger. When they grow, they lay down a lot of little lines. You see little lines on it there. And in the summer, when it's growing quickly, these lines will be further apart. In the winter, when it's cold, they'll be closer together.
Very much like the growth rings on a tree.
Yeah, exactly the same sort of principle as that. And it gives you the same sort of information as well. It tells you not just how old the fish is, but how quickly it was growing in any particular year.
I've heard that in good summers, when they grow particularly well, you get wider growth bands. Would that be true?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. You can see these wide bands, and so 1976 is an outstanding year for fish that were alive at that time, really, when it was warm.
We've seen these growth rings on the scale. Are there any other ways of judging the age of a fish?
Yeah, well, any of the hard parts of the fish are all right. So any of the bony bits, in other words. So the backbone, the fin rays, or the gill cover, those big plates of bone in the gill cover. In fact, we often use them for fish that have been killed. So if you have to kill a fish for any reason, you can take off this gill cover bone and dip it in boiling water to soften the flesh, give it a wipe with a tissue to remove the sort of softened meat, and then let it dry, and there you can write on it with Indian ink the age, date, all the details. You've got a permanent record of the
And the growth rings are fairly evident on those?
Oh yeah, in mullet they're very easy. Some other species they're virtually impossible. In mullet they're pretty easy to see.
Mullet are generally regarded to be uncatchable. What do you think that should be?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's my personal view, but I think it's because of the traditional approach to sea fishing that there's been. Sea anglers have always used fairly crude tackle with big hooks, strong lines, and caught, I suppose, what you might regard as fairly unsophisticated fish, things that would feed on big lumps of food. But mullet, which feed on tiny particles, are not really susceptible to that sort of approach at all.
Well, you mentioned these tiny particles that they feed on. What exactly is their main sort of foodstuff?
Well, most mullet feed on what you might call the mud or silt on the bed of rivers and on the seabed. And in this will be a high proportion of tiny microscopic algae. And they'll also take little algae off the surface of rocks and piers and jetties and things like that. So they feed on absolutely minute particles of mud and tiny specks of plant life.
Well, if they're feeding on this sort of microscopic stuff, you know, what are we going to put on a hook, and how are we going to catch them?
Well, it's impossible, of course, to use what you might call the natural diet of the fish in most cases. But fortunately for us, mullet are great opportunists. Wherever there's a rich supply of any sort of food material that they can take in small enough bits, they will feed on it. So they'll feed on fish carcasses, they'll feed on maggots from piles of rotting seaweed, they'll feed on bread, chips, anything they can get their mouths on. In fact, often you don't need to educate the things, because they've already found a food source, and all you've got to do is copy what they're getting naturally. So, I mean, I suppose it's not very savoury, but in many cases, sewer outfalls are the places that people fish and catch a lot of mullet.
Well, how many species of mullet can the British mullet angler expect to catch?
Well, 3 really, realistically. You do occasionally get wanderers from other areas, I think, but we've got the thin-lip mullet, that's the one that migrates up into fresh water and is the one you're most likely to find actually several miles from river mouth. You've got the thick-lip mullet, which overlaps with the thin lip and occurs in estuaries, but is much more a fish of the open coast and will be very abundant in harbours and places like that. And then you've got the golden mullet, which is a bit smaller fish and is really favoured on sandy beaches and in warm lagoons, places like that, where the water gets pretty warm in the summer.
But they're fairly localised then, you wouldn't normally expect to catch those everywhere, let's say.
You know, and I think there are places where they're pretty common.
I think Langstone Harbour is one of the more famous places. And the Fleet, of course, the Fleet in Dorset.
Yeah, we've got.
But they're all basically the same type of fish, the same grey mullet, but a different suborder.
Oh yeah, I think to the sort of inexperienced eye, they're the same fish really, and there are even for experts, there are quite large difficulties of telling apart the young stages in particular of these mullet, because they do look so much alike. And I think wherever you went in the world, you would recognise a grey mullet. You know, it might be a different species, but you'd recognise it.
Yeah.
Going back to thin lips, here at the lab we've got a fish counter on the river which is several miles from the open sea. The counter's for monitoring salmon runs really, but it picks up shoals of mullet when they come up to feed on algae on the riverbed. Many a time you can see mullet and dace feeding side by side.
Well, Mike, thanks very much for giving us an insight into the behaviour of the mullet. Why not go fishing, eh?
Yes, good idea.
Right. Well, we've come to Weymouth this morning to fish for thick-lip mullet in a traditional harbour setting. It's 6 a.m. on a glorious sunny day, and the charter wrecking boats are already leaving the harbour for a busy day's fishing offshore. Well, we're going to be using 2 methods this morning, float fishing and paternostering. And with those methods, we'll be using 2 baits, mackerel and bread. Mike and our friend Steve Hill are a little further along the quay, so let's go and see how they've been getting on, shall we? So what sort of tackle are you using then, Mike?
Well, it's float gear. It's pretty simple float gear. 12-foot float rod, sort of thing you might use if you're impoverished for coarse fishing. Fixed spool reel, 4-pound line, what you'd call a waggler, although I'm no great sort of exponent of floats. It's a cheap plastic one. enough shot to get it down somewhere near the tip, so there's not too much of it, too much buoyancy above the surface. And a size 10 eyed hook, and simple as that really. And start fishing round about the bottom, so you have just enough length of line to keep the bait just off the bed. And if you don't get bites, come up 6 inches or a foot at a time until you do get bites.
Anything yet, Steve?
I've had a few knots, but I think it's small pollock or wrasse.
Now, you're using a paternoster rig with a ledger, yeah?
That's right, the rig is very straightforward really. I've got a fixed ball reel loaded with 5-pound line. On the end of the line I've got an Arsley bomb tied. 18 inches above that I've got a dropper. That dropper is using a water knot, a 4-turn water knot. The end of the dropper I've got a size 12 freshwater hook, baited with mackerel. About 2 foot above that dropper I've got a second dropper. As an alternative to a water knot, I've tied a small swivel into the line and tied another piece of line onto the eye of the swivel to form the dropper.
And you use 2 droppers, what, to fish at different depths?
That's right, the water's here at the moment is about 12 foot deep. And I'm not sure which depth the fish are feeding at, so droppers set at different depths offers a chance of finding a fish or two.
And different baits, do you use 2 baits?
Yeah, it always makes sense to use something you've got in your ground bait mix really. Bit of bread, fish, meat.
Well, what about bite detection?
Well, the lead's directly beneath the rod tip, so any pull on the rod tip, signals a bite, a knot or a pull round.
Yeah. Well, as you said, it's a very straightforward method, really.
I'm in.
Taking line, but I don't give it too much. When you hook a decent-sized harbour mullet, boats and mooring ropes present a major problem. A drop net's an essential piece of kit unless you can find some steps to play out and land your fish. So this is a thick lip. It's got a very broad, bulbous upper lip with lots of small pimple-like ridges along its inner side. The lower lip and jaws are curious W-shaped, shovel-like structure with a central ridge. Behind the upper lip's a thin membrane, which allows the fish to push its lip forward when it's feeding. Underneath, the gap between the gill covers is long and straight.
Better put it back in the sea, I suppose. He's a bit tired, that one, wasn't he?
Of course, a drop net's by far the safest way to land a fish from a harbour wall, but it takes a bit of practice to do it single-handed.
It's a beauty, Steve. Bit of bugger's 5 pound, not really near it.
Time for a quick photo, and then back it goes. Using the net in reverse is the best way to return your fish.
join us at Christchurch. Having bought our permits and paid for the boat the day before, Mike and Dave Cooling load the spinning rods and tackle bags.
First time I've ever fished this place, which is the home of mullet spinning, really. I think this is where the method originated. Well, this is the type of thing we'll be using. It's a bar spoon with, instead of a heavy metal body, a set of plastic beads on it. And you can buy these things called gen spoons, but this is one that I made up myself. There's several others, easy enough to make. You can buy the various bits, the blades and the beads and so on. And the idea is that the mullet is attracted by the spoon and then takes the bait. Neither the bait nor the spoon's likely to work on its own. So what you do is to slide the worm up on the big hook at the back here, and the little one just stops it sliding back down again. I'll show you more or less how to do that.
Is there a mullet?
Yeah. So we just slide him up over the eye of the hook and then nick the head of the worm onto the other hook. And I don't know what everybody else does, but I like to trim it off just at the bend like that, so that there's not much hanging for them to suck at, and then they take it. So there you go. Hopefully that'll now catch me a mullet.
As the tide rises and covers the estuary mudflats, the mullet move in.
That didn't take very long, did it? Oh, bugger thing, you can jump out to see what I'm doing. I'm using the rod that I use for most of my spinning. Perhaps it's a bit on the powerful side at a 1 3/4 test curve, but as you can see, even a modest thin lip puts a good bend in it. My usual spool of 8-pound line allows me to take a few liberties when I'm landing fish.
Going well, isn't it?
This is a typical thin lip. The obvious distinguishing features from the thick lip are, first of all, this very narrow lip here. In the thick lip it's got lots and lots of little warty papillae on it, and it's much broader that way. And the other sort of feature really is the way that what they call its jugular interspace, that's this sort of space marked out by where the gills are, almost touches together there.
in the thick lip, it's open all the way along and more or less parallel sided. So they're the two easy things. They're also a bit slimmer in the body than thick lips are. But basically, they look very much the same. Yeah, I'll put him back before it comes to any harm. Do you think the speed retrieve makes any difference, Dave?
I think probably as slow as possible is the best general rate.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
But I sometimes wonder if a faster speed could be used to encourage them to bite.
Yeah. They often seem to take it just as it turns up, don't they, at the end of your retrieve? I mean, that seems to be a good time to actually get a bite and hook one.
That's right. One of the complicating things is, of course, the faster you retrieve, the shallower the lure will fish.
Yeah.
It's a mixture of speed and depth.
I think the other thing is that sometimes if you wind very fast, the whole lot spins round, the worm and all. Sort of friction keeps the whole thing spinning. I don't think that helps much.
Makes a mess of the line on the rib.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most important thing to remember is that you may experience fish plucking and snatching at the bait on many retrieves. Even the most experienced angler finds it difficult not to strike. But more fish will be put off or lost by premature striking than anything else.
Shit.
The trick is to let these plucks develop into a bite that pulls the rod tip around. You must maintain a steady rate of retrieve, keep the lure working. Raise the rod slightly, and the fish will do the rest. About the same size, Mike?
Yeah, near enough, Steve.
Well, the secret is to fish near the one that you're playing, mate. That's the answer.
Well, we saw that the other day. didn't
Yeah.
we? Fish always follow a hooked fish in.
It's a big fish that day. Bit bigger than the others.
It was hanging very deep.
We're in the boat round, actually.
Yeah. You do that to fish. If you get a 30 or 40 pound conger, it really pulls the boat round.
Not many of them out there, though.
No. Yeah. Diddler. Well, you'll have to get the biggest one, Dave, wouldn't you?
That's it.
Perhaps the edge of the worm, isn't it? Oh, I got him on the front hook.
and you unhook yourself. That's a better fish, Dave. I think I'm going to have to put another worm on. Diving for the bottom. Certainly is. Got the net. Got an idea. Let's just tuck that hook in. Throw some sandwiches in there. Oh, that's monstrous. That's giving me some shit. Yeah.
Even this level of boating activity doesn't deter the fish. They're used to it. Just work the lures a bit deeper to keep in touch with the shoals.
Anybody who says that mullet have got soft mouth just try to take a look at a fish like this.
Very cool.
Well, if you're anything like me, if you can't be fishing, you'll be playing with some tackle of one description or another. Well, I'm making some bar spinners at the moment, and I thought you might like to see how I go about making them. You need very little in the way of materials, and even less in the way of tools, certainly nothing specialised. Well, tools, what do we need? Well, there's a pair of long nose pliers for bending and cutting wire, and a small pair of very sharp scissors. The component parts of the bar spoon comprise of a 5-inch length of wire with a loop twisted at one end, a small brass clevis which is slid along the spindle and holds one of these blades in position. Well, next on your shopping list there should be a packet of small 5mm plastic beads. These form the body of the lure. So in other words, they replace the standard metal body of a bar spoon. Then comes a piece of 15-pound mono line. This will hold the hooks in position. The reason we use 15 pounds is because anything smaller tends to revolve with the worm and causes horrendous line twist. And anything much above 15 pounds breaking strain is difficult to tie small knots. Of course, you need small, neat knots. Then there is a small section of insulation cable from domestic wiring, and that holds in place a size 12 freshwater hook. And the last thing you need is an Aberdeen hook. Quite a small Aberdeen, probably about the smallest you can find is preferable. and that should have as small an eye as possible, a longish shank, a nice small bend, and most important, a very, very sharp point. So first of all, take the spindle, the clevis, and the blade. The blade needs to be put over the end of the clevis, and then with the rounded side of the blade facing up and towards the front of the spindle, put the spindle through the clevis. So the blade is now mounted on the spindle. There we are. Once again, the rounded side of the blade must face forward. Then we take half a dozen beads. Now it doesn't seem to make a great deal of difference which colour beads you do use, but you might like to experiment with various colours, say red, yellow or green. An important point here, you must leave a gap just here, because if you jam that up against there, the clevis won't be free to move and the blade won't spin. So come back about the width of one bead. In this case they're 5mm beads, so we come back about 5mm. And the next job is to put the bend in the bottom of the spindle. Now the first movement to make, obviously you hold the spindle with the pliers and make a downwards movement, then reposition the pliers to the other side of the bend and twist around, right around the nose of the pliers and back over. That has to be twisted like so. The fiddly job, but you don't need to be Mr. Universe to do it. And then just trim off this loose end with the pliers. The next stage is to tie in the length of mono onto the back loop, which is done with a standard blood loop, similar to the knot that you might tie a hook on with. Just 5 or 6 turns around, back through the loop, and as you pull that tight, a little bit of saliva just to lubricate the knot. There we go. Now then, trim off that loose end. Next thing to add is this small section of cable insulation, just stripped from domestic wiring, that slides over the mono, goes all the way up and covers that knot, like so. Now then, take our small freshwater hook, anything from a size 8 to a size 12. This is the retaining hook that is slid up the line, and the eye of the hook is then pushed, it's a bit fiddly, but it's pushed into the cable covering. Mind you don't hook yourself when you're doing this. There we go. And the last thing to be added is the Aberdeen hook, and that's tied on with, once again, a blood loop. What you're trying to achieve is a length of line in between the retaining hook and the top of the Aberdeen hook of about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. So you need to take that up as close as you can as you tie the knot. Perhaps this is the most fiddliest bit, but with a little bit of practice you can get a nice neat knot. There we are, 1/2 dozen turns. Back through that loop. snip that end off as close as you can to the knot without damaging the knot. One last check, that's fine. So what we have here, you've got the spindle with the beads mounted on, the clevis and the blade, the small retaining hook, length of mono, and the Aberdeen hook. As we've seen, the worm is threaded up the Aberdeen hook and up the line, and the head is then nicked on the freshwater hook. In actual fact, if you have a small section of worm left, you can vary the length that hook is away from the Aberdeen. So if you have, say, a 2 or 3 inch section of worm, it goes up there. And there we are. In our next session, we used the baited spinner on a small Dorset river. We carried out a number of experiments concerning size of blade and baits. And here are our findings. By adopting a mobile approach, we stalk the shoals of finlips as they move upriver on the incoming tide. When a group of large fish arrive at one of their regular stopping off points, we watch their reaction as a lure is retrieved. Many show no interest at all, but some seem almost irresistibly drawn to the flashing blade. This nipping at the bait is typical. And then, success.
Ragworm was by far the most effective bait. Maggots and earthworms took a few fish, and rubber worms and other artificials, even when we laced them with lugworm and fish oil, proved useless.
To be honest, the size and colour of the lures doesn't make much difference to the fish, but a larger blade makes the lures easier to cast and control. Tell me, why do you think that this baited spinner actually works?
Well, truth to tell, I don't really know, but I suppose only two choices. Either they're trying to eat it, like predatory fish do, or something else. And the something else, I would think, is that they're trying to steal whatever it's got from it. They think it's a small fish, perhaps another member of their shoal, you know, swimming past, and they come and try and take it off it.
And we've proved that this is also sort of a successful method for other shoal species, such as chub and even roach.
Yeah,
so I think this sort of theory holds water.
Yeah. I guess not all shoaling fish would be equally susceptible, but
perhaps not.
mullets seem particularly vulnerable.
They're certainly not a known predator, are they?
No,
You know? So
no.
It would certainly seem that that's the most likely theory.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we'll carry on believing it until somebody disproves it.
That's right.
Well, it's the last day of June and the spring tides are at their highest. A fortnight ago there was a raging storm on the south coast. Well, during those storms that lasted several days, tons upon tons of wrack and kelp were ripped from the seabed and dumped here on the shore. Now these deposits of weed go several hundred yards along the beach, and all in all must amount to several thousand tons of weed. Now this isn't an occurrence which is restricted to this stretch of coast. This is happening all the way along this coastline. Now for the past couple of weeks we've had very good weather. It's been nice sunny days, and these piles of weed have heated up in the sun and started to decompose, and the heat that's generated is tremendous, as is the stench. The smell from this is indescribable. Well, the seaweed fly, Salopa frigida, actually lays its eggs in these piles of rotting weed. At times the surface of the weed is swarming with millions upon millions of seaweed flies. They burrow under the surface crust and lay their eggs, and after 3 or 4 days the eggs hatch out. And this is what we find. Deep inside, where the heat is at its highest, thousands upon thousands of these maggots. How can we put this to our advantage? Well, it's quite simple really. On the next set of spring tides, the water level rises and washes out the maggots from the weed. Well, the maggots are lighter or less dense than seawater, and so they float on the surface film. And the mullet, over countless generations, have become accustomed to this type of food. And what they do is they actually swim along the top, right in the very surface, like goldfish in a pond, scooping maggots off of the top. Now there is a way of presenting a bait on the top, and Mike has used this method now for perhaps 15 years or more. It's a method that he and a few friends developed, and it's perhaps the most successful and effective way of catching mullet off the top. He's a few hundred yards further along the shore, so let's go and find him and find out just how he manages to catch mullet off the top. Hello there, Mike.
Ah, Steve.
Well, that looks like hard work.
It certainly is. I'm knackered.
I think you could do with a JCB for that job, couldn't you?
I could do. I could indeed.
But is it working? That's the main thing.
Well, I don't know. There's 1 or 2 fish moving up on the tide now,
Yeah.
so it's. It looks like it might work. I expect there might be a few fish later on.
And really, I mean, this is basically to prolong the fishing time, so we encourage fish to congregate in one area.
Yeah. It's not a very good day today. You know, tide's not really perfect, and it's not going to shift much in the way of weed itself. So I think we'll have to put some in. You know.
So ground bait does help then.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And there you are, the biggest natural ground bait in the world, isn't it?
Well, I'm
Really.
impressed. I'm impressed. You've got some tackle for us to have a look at, I believe, to show us how you catch these mullet off the top.
Yeah, that's right.
That's just at the beach there. Let's go and have a look,
Sure.
eh?
Okay.
So this is the tackle then, Mike.
Yeah, this is it, Steve. It's a 9'6" fly rod, sort of thing you might use for trout fishing. Cheap fly reel, number 7 line, and 6 feet of 6-pound nylon with what I call a maggot fly on the end.
Yeah, well, that looks very interesting.
Yeah, that's the thing, a little bit of polyethylene foam on a size 10 or 12 hook, that's all it is really.
With a bit of whipping at each end just to secure it.
Just stop it sliding down on the bend. You know?
Right. And that's to what? Make the float buoyant, the hook buoyant.
Yeah, that's right, because the fish are feeding right on the surface, you know, so you've got to get your maggots in the surface film if you want to catch them.
So your fly line's a floater as well then?
Yeah,
I take it.
floating fly line, yeah. Cheap fly line, of course. You don't want to use your sort of expensive one in the sea, really.
No, that's understandable, yeah. And what, you were telling me you actually put some shop-bought maggots on
Yeah,
on
that's
there.
right. In fact, I got some here in in a bag somewhere. Traditional maggots in the traditional maggot box, really. There they are. Whoops, chuck most of them in the bag. But there you go. Just ordinary blue bottle maggots.
Yeah.
And you prog 3 or 4 of them on the bend of the hook, and away you go.
And you feel that definitely makes a difference?
Oh yeah, you know, 10 times as many bites I would think with maggots on as without.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So it is possible to catch them just on the imitation maggot, as
You
it were?
can. In fact, the first ones we ever caught were on artificial dry flies.
Were they?
But you know, we soon found that putting maggots on the hook improved things no end. Really.
Oh, well. Right, well, let's see how you go about catching them, eh?
Okay, we'll try.
Are those mullet, Mike?
No, they're sand smelts. They usually turn up before the mullet. It's a good sign. There's a few fish moving in now. As you can see, they're quite obvious. At times there could be hundreds of fish along a short stretch of beach. You don't need to be a champion caster, the fish are often right at the edge.
That's a nice fish, Mike. And well hooked.
Like the scissors.
Pull it back.
Further along the beach, Mike's son Richard is float fishing with maggots.
That's all right, look that last one.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's really feed a lot of the time.
This is the utmost test for angler and tackle. On 4-pound line, the speed and agility and stamina of a mullet pushes every item of tackle to the limit.
Finished yet.
We hope that other anglers will now feel more confident to fish for mullet, to always return them with care so that other anglers may continue to enjoy this fine fish.
Well, that's mullet for you. Superb, hard-fighting fish caught from a variety of locations using just a few of the many methods available. What more could any angler want?